They tried to have me arrested for criminal trespassing on my own property because I watered my petunias 2 minutes past some insane arbitrary HOA deadline. And the best part? The lady who called the cops, Cordelia, the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, had absolutely no idea she was messing with the retired Chief Justice who was about to dismantle her entire fraudulent operation. Picture this. It's 6:47 a.m. I'm standing on my back patio in my silk robe, the steam rising off my mug of coffee, watching my lawn sprinklers, which I had carefully programmed, hit my prize-winning hydrangeas. The air smelled of wet earth, jasmine, and that precious silence you only get in early retirement. 2 minutes, literally 120 seconds, past the HOA's restricted irrigation window. That's when Cordelia's designer heels clicked onto my driveway, announcing the arrival of chaos. She called the police. 3 patrol cars showed up, lights flashing, sirens muted, the whole 9 yards. Neighbors were peeking through their blinds like I was laundering money in the flower beds. And there I was, a man who spent 30 years sending actual murderers and fraudsters to prison, having cold metal handcuffs clicked onto my wrists for the crime of a thriving perennial garden. "Sir," the young officer said, sounding thoroughly confused, "you're under arrest for criminal trespassing during restricted community resource hours." I looked at Cordelia, her shellacked blonde hair gleaming, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on her face, and I just smiled. "Lady, you have absolutely no clue what you just started. My name is Arthur Donovan. Art to my friends. And after 3 decades in the judicial system, I thought retirement meant trading gavels for gardening and case files for cookbooks. My wife, Eleanor, and I bought our dream home in Stonehaven Meadows 6 months ago, a perfect Mediterranean-style villa with a lush backyard. The first few weeks were bliss, filled with the smell of fresh stucco and new beginnings. I'd casually mentioned my former job to a few neighbors over welcome dinners. Most were genuinely delighted. Finally, old Mr. Henderson had sighed. Someone here who understands justice. If only I'd listened to the nervousness in his voice. Enter Cordelia Ashworth. She wasn't just a middle manager. She was the walking, talking embodiment of petty tyranny. She wore power suits, her nails were always perfectly manicured talons, and her smile was so tight it looked painful. She lived in the largest house, naturally, and ran her real estate empire from a home office that literally overlooked half the street. Trouble, you see, announced itself with the clicking of those expensive heels. Day 3, I got my first violation notice. Not for anything significant, mind you, for planting heirloom tomatoes in a raised bed in my backyard. Actual food growing in actual soil on property I actually own. But according to Cordelia's twisted interpretation of the Declaration of Covenants, conditions and restrictions, the DCCRs, as she called them, visible produce was an unauthorized botanical installation. I tried reasoning. I showed her the section about homeowner garden maintenance rights. "Judge or not," she snapped, her voice dripping venom. "I've been interpreting these rules for 10 years. That was my first red flag. Anyone who dismisses 3 decades of judicial experience while wielding a cheap clipboard has never faced real authority. But I played nice. I pulled the tomatoes. I planted approved, sterile lavender bushes that cost triple and attracted 0 hummingbirds. I figured I'd keep the peace, pick my battles. Then the whispers started, deeply unsettling. Conspiratorial whispers. Mrs. Chavez from down the street, an elderly widow, showed me a $500 fine for hanging her laundry outside on a Tuesday when the covenant supposedly only permitted it on Wednesdays and Saturdays. The young Rossi family across the way, they got dinged for leaving a small plastic water table on their deck. A hazardous eyesore. Everyone had a story, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every targeted family shared certain traits: non-Anglo surnames, renters, young families, or the elderly who lacked the energy to fight back. Cordelia wasn't managing a community. She was running an exclusionary racket, using the DCCRs as weapons against anyone who didn't fit her narrow, monochromatic vision of suburban perfection. It reminded me chillingly of a selective enforcement case I'd presided over years ago. The landlord who only enforced lease violations against minority tenants. Same playbook, different neighborhood, and that's when I realized she'd made a fatal mistake. She moved next door to a man who spent his entire career studying exactly how small-time tyrants operate and exactly how to bring them down using the letter of the law, the phony water theft violation, the one that got me. Arrested was the moment I flipped the script. I knew my irrigation timer was set to shut off at 6:45 a.m. exactly. But there was Cordelia, every morning at 6:43 a.m., materializing across the street in her power walking gear, clipboard in hand, timing my sprinklers like I was a national security threat. I installed a professional-grade, time-stamped security camera aimed directly at my sprinkler control panel. The little mechanical whir of the autofocus was the new sound of justice clearing its throat. What I discovered was pure, unadulterated comedic gold wrapped in criminal intent. My timer was precise, 6:45 da. Her expensive designer watch? Running 3 minutes fast. She was literally creating fictional crimes from thin air using a flawed timepiece. But it got better. My camera caught the rest of the street, and guess whose sprinklers ran until 6:53 a.m. every day? Whose husband power washed the driveway during restricted hours? Whose pool maintenance guy ran loud equipment at 7 odd a.m. sharp on Sundays? That's right. The HOA president herself was the most egregious, consistent rule breaker in the entire community. I invited her over for coffee. She arrived like a general inspecting a conquered territory, her overwhelming floral perfume announcing her presence before she even knocked. "I have photographic evidence of your violations, Cordelia," I said, calmly spreading 3 weeks of time-stamped photos across my kitchen table like a royal flush. Her perfectly composed face shattered. Confusion, recognition, and then raw, blistering fury. "These photos are illegal surveillance," she shrieked, her voice hitting a frequency that probably startled dogs 2 streets away. "Taken from a public vantage point of activities visible to anyone walking by," I countered, sipping my coffee. "Exactly the same surveillance you've been conducting on my property." That's when she committed the tactical error that sealed her fate. Instead of retreating, she chose the nuclear option. "This is criminal harassment. You're trespassing on irrigation schedules and stalking HOA officials." Before I could even explain basic concepts like property rights and temporal physics, she was speed dialing 911, her manicured finger attacking the buttons like she was trying to stab them. The moment she was arrested, I knew the battle had only begun. She retaliated with a violation blitz that made D-Day look subtle. The Rossis got fined because their son's soccer ball was visible through the garage window. Mrs. Chavez faced a fine for the smell of her traditional cooking being too pungent for the community aesthetic. Then came the line she should never have crossed. She threatened to call Child Protective Services, CPS, on the Rossi family, claiming their children's toys visible through the window constituted hazardous household conditions. Using false CPS reports to terrorize a family? That crossed every single legal and moral boundary I had. The metallic taste of pure judicial rage filled my mouth. I called the other 2 board members, a quiet accountant named Frank and a nervous schoolteacher named Linda. What I discovered chilled my judicial blood. Cordelia had been blackmailing them into silent submission for years, threatening Frank's accounting business and Linda's teaching license if they ever questioned her interpretations. She wasn't leading. She was operating a one-woman dictatorship. They were ready to fight, but they were terrified. I told them to wait. I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled the original DCCRs, the actual legal documents. Cordelia had been slicing the 48-hour guest parking rule down to 24 hours, stealing money based on fictional timelines. Same criminal playbook, different address. But then I met with my old friend, Detective Martinez. He looked exhausted. "Judge Donovan," he said, sliding a manila folder across the diner table. "She's filed 12 complaints against you this month. But here's the problem. We ran a full background check on her shell companies. And we ran the HOA's corporate status." He paused, a grim look in his eyes. "The Stonehaven Meadows Homeowners Association officially dissolved 18 months ago. Failure to file an annual report. Legally, she has zero authority to enforce anything." The coffee mug almost slipped from my hand. 18 months. Cordelia hadn't just been abusing HOA power. She'd been running a completely fraudulent ghost organization, collecting thousands in illegal fees and filing 17 fraudulent liens against neighbors' properties. Every fine, every violation, every threat, all of it was criminal impersonation of authority. I called District Attorney Patricia Wolf, my voice vibrating with a kind of manic excitement. "Pat, I need to report the most beautiful case of organized fraud you've ever seen. A fake HOA president running a dissolved corporation, filing bogus liens, threatening residents with non-existent authority." The DA's office became the nerve center of a quiet revolution. We mapped out charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, filing false instruments, conspiracy to defraud elderly residents, and my personal favorite, impersonating a government official every time she weaponized the police against imaginary crimes. Federal charges alone could bury her for 20 years. The timing was everything. Cordelia, in her delusion, had scheduled a mandatory resident safety evaluation for me, a fake security tribunal, for the very next Monday morning at 9 a.m. The cosmic irony was perfect. While she prepared to ambush me with fake security theater, real federal marshals were preparing to ambush her with genuine handcuffs. Monday morning felt like the Super Bowl of suburban justice. The community center was packed, the air thick with nervous anticipation. Cordelia strutted to the podium like she was accepting an Academy Award instead of walking into a federal trap. She launched into a theatrical performance, pointing at me like I was personally responsible for every weed in the neighborhood. "I demand this troublemaker publicly apologize for his systematic harassment of your Democratic leadership," she declared, pointing directly at me. I stood slowly, walked to the podium, and held up the official state dissolution documents, like the Declaration of Independence. Before I address anything, the community deserves to know something critical about this organization. According to official state records, the Stonehaven Meadows Homeowners Association died on March 15th, 18 months ago. The collective gasp sucked all the air from the room. Cordelia's face cycled through horror, denial, and pure blind panic. The room erupted. Mrs. Chavez rose like an avenging angel. "You stole my daughter's rent money." The Rossi family jumped up, tears streaming. "You terrorized our children while robbing us blind." Cordelia frantically pounded her gavel. "This meeting is illegal. I'm calling federal authorities." The irony was perfect. Federal authorities were already there. The double doors burst open. FBI agents in tactical gear flooded in, followed by IRS criminal investigation officers. The lead agent, a woman who looked like she could bench press a small car, approached the podium. "Cordelia Ashworth," she stated with cold precision, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, filing false instruments, conspiracy to defraud consumers, and operating a dissolved corporation. For criminal purposes." The mechanical click-click of handcuffs closing around Cordelia's wrists was the most beautiful sound I had heard since the judge first called me Justice Donovan. "This is illegal persecution. I have Democratic authority. You can't arrest elected officials," she screamed as she was perp-walked past 127 residents, all recording her downfall in glorious high definition. Her final sentence: 18 months in federal prison, full restitution of $147,000, and a lifetime ban from any HOA involvement nationwide. The community used the recovered money to establish a legitimate HOA with term limits, mandatory audits, and a Cordelia clause. Any resident can demand incorporation and financial documents within 24 hours. Transparency isn't suggested. It's legally required. My garden is now the neighborhood showpiece. My tomatoes are softball-sized. My sprinklers run exactly when I choose, and no one has timed my irrigation in over a year. Retirement finally became what I dreamed it would be. Peaceful mornings, coffee, and a sense of genuine community, where families feel safe and the only thing growing unchecked is kindness. She tried to destroy us with fake authority. Instead, she accidentally created a neighborhood full of people who finally understood their rights. What about you? What's the worst, most absurd HOA nightmare story you have? Was it a fine for a mailbox sticker? A fight over fence height? Drop your story in the comments below because I read every single one. Did I go too far? Or did Cordelia get exactly what she deserved? Let me know. And if you enjoyed watching karma delivered with a judicial hammer, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories of everyday people taking down neighborhood tyrants.